An 8-year-old girl begins to notice that her mother's smiles hide deep pain. Intrigued by the silent signs, she discovers she's about to be separated from the person she loves most. With no resources or support, she decides to face the court alone to stop this injustice. But no one expected her childish voice to become the cry of thousands for justice. I will create this narrative with American characters as requested. We will adapt the premise to an American context, following all guidelines. I will begin by creating the chapters in separate artifacts, each with 1-200-400 words. The story will be set in the United States and feature characters with American names. Here is the first chapter. The Little Lawyer. Chapter 1. The Hidden Papers. In the cramped apartment in Greenwich Village, New York City, Sophia Miller had become an expert at deciphering her mother's face. At 8 years old, she knew every sign Deborah tried to hide. When the smile didn't reach her eyes, when her voice trembled slightly on the phone, or when she pretended to sleep too early. For Sophia, those details were like an open book her mother didn't know she was showing. On that May morning, the girl with curly hair and observant eyes watched Deborah prepare breakfast with mechanical movements. The deep dark circles under her eyes revealed another sleepless night. "Mom, are you okay?" Sophia asked, adjusting her school backpack on her small shoulders. Deborah forced a smile, serving buttered toast on the colorful plate. "Of course, sweetheart. Just a little tired. Work at Mount Sinai Hospital has been demanding." Sophia bit her lip, knowing there was more to the story. Her mother was a nursing technician at Mount Sinai, and despite the exhausting routine of night shifts, she had never been as downcast as in recent weeks. "Grab your snack," Deborah pointed to the refrigerator. "I don't want you to be late for school." On the way to Greenwich Village Elementary School, Sophia walked hand in hand with her mother, pensive. The girl's watchful eyes noticed when Deborah checked her cell phone for the 5th time in less than 10 minutes, her hands trembling. "Is it Dad?" Sophia asked suddenly. Deborah almost stumbled, quickly putting the device back in her pocket. "No, honey. It's just work." Sophia knew it wasn't true. It had been almost 2 years since her parents had separated, after Richard Miller, her father, met Victoria, a lawyer from a prominent firm downtown New York City. Since then, meetings with her father had become increasingly sporadic and cold. "When will I see Dad again?" Sophia insisted. "Soon, dear. He's been very busy." Deborah's voice became distant, as it always did when the subject was Richard. At the school gate, Sophia hugged her mother tightly, as if she could protect her from some invisible danger. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, my little one. More than anything in this world." During English class, while teacher Louise explained pronouns, Sophia kept her gaze fixed on the window. She couldn't stop thinking about her mother's sadness. In recent days, she had heard Deborah crying softly in the bathroom when she thought Sophia was already asleep. "Sophia? Can you answer the question?" The teacher's voice brought her back to reality. "Sorry, teacher." "Could you repeat it?" Giggles spread through the room. Sophia was normally one of the best students, always attentive and participatory. During recess, instead of playing with the other children, Sophia looked for her best friend, Julia. "Something's wrong with my mom," she confessed, sitting in a corner of the playground. "She cries in secret, whispers on the phone, and hides her cell phone when I get close." Julia offered her juice box. "My parents did that too before they separated." "But my parents are already separated," Sophia replied. "It's something else, I'm sure." "Then you need to investigate," Julia suggested with the simplicity of an 8-year-old. "Like in the detective movies we watch." The idea planted a seed in Sophia's head. That afternoon, returning home, she began to pay attention to every detail. Deborah had to leave for a night shift, leaving Sophia with Mrs. Eleanor, the trusted neighbor from apartment 3B. "Your mother said she'll be back in the early morning," explained Mrs. Eleanor. An elderly woman with grey hair and calloused hands. "Have you had dinner, my dear?" "Yes, I have," Sophia lied, a plan forming in her mind. When Mrs. Eleanor got distracted by her evening soap opera, Sophia slipped into the hallway and used the spare key she always carried around her neck to silently enter her own apartment. In Deborah's bedroom, she began her search, being careful not to mess anything up. She looked under the mattress, inside the closet, in the dresser drawers. That's when she noticed that the floorboard under the bed seemed slightly loose. With trembling fingers, Sophia removed the board and found a blue plastic folder. Her heart raced as she opened the contents, documents with a court's letterhead, formal letters, and notifications. Most of the words were too complicated for her to fully understand. But some jumped out: custody battle, hearing, contestation, visitation rights. One document in particular made her eyes well up with tears. It was a petition signed by Richard Miller, represented by Carter, Smith and Associates, requesting sole custody of Sophia Miller. Her father wanted to take her away from her mother. Sophia let out a muffled sob. Now everything made sense. The secret calls, the hidden crying, the permanent sadness in Deborah's eyes. With trembling hands, she found a notification with a date. The hearing would be in 2 weeks, at the Manhattan Civil Court. There was also a handwritten letter from Deborah to the Legal Aid Society, pleading for legal representation, with an attached response stating that, due to the volume of cases, they would only be able to assist her after the hearing date. Sophia felt cold. Her mother would face the court alone, against her father and Victoria's expensive law firm. Hearing footsteps in the hallway, Sophia quickly put the documents back in the folder, returned it to its hiding place, and adjusted the floorboard. She left the apartment silently and went back to Mrs. Eleanor's, who hadn't even noticed her absence. Lying on the neighbor's sofa bed, Sophia couldn't sleep. In her head, a single phrase repeated, "They won't separate me from my mom." The next morning, when Deborah returned from her night shift exhausted, Sophia hugged her with unusual force. "Is everything all right, my love?" Deborah asked, noticing something different in her daughter's eyes. Sophia nodded, determined. "Everything will be fine, Mom, I promise." At that moment, Sophia made a decision that would change not only her life, but the American judicial system. If her mother couldn't afford a lawyer, she would become one herself. At 8 years old, Sophia Miller began her journey to become the youngest advocate the Manhattan Civil Court had ever seen. The following Monday, Sophia arrived at school with a definite plan. While the other children ran to the playground during recess, she headed straight for the school library, a quiet place little frequented at that time. "Mrs. Clara, I need your help," Sophia said to the librarian, an elderly woman with thick glasses and a gentle smile who had worked at the school for over 20 years. Constance Oliver, affectionately called Mrs. Clara by everyone, looked up from the book she was cataloguing. "What can I do for you, Sophia? A book for your science project?" "No, today is different," Sophia replied, adjusting the bangs that stubbornly fell over her eyes. "I need to learn about laws, family laws, about child custody." The librarian tilted her head, intrigued by the unusual request. "May I ask why?" Sophia hesitated. She trusted Mrs. Clara, but she knew adults often underestimated children. She decided to take a chance. "My dad wants to take me away from my mom. There's going to be a court hearing, and my mom doesn't have money for a lawyer." Mrs. Clara's face softened with understanding and concern. "Dear, these matters are very complex, even for adults." "That's why I need to study," Sophia insisted with determination in her eyes. "My mom is alone in this." Something in the girl's gaze touched Constance deeply. In her 30 years as a school librarian, she had never seen such resolve in a child's eyes. "Let's see what we can find," she finally replied, getting up from her desk. "But remember, Sophia, not everything you need to know is in books. Some things are on the internet." During that week, Sophia established a routine. Every break and free moment was dedicated to studying in the library with Mrs. Clara's discreet help. The librarian not only separated accessible materials on family law, but also printed simplified articles from the Children's Protection Act and explained complex legal terms in a way Sophia could understand. "Look, Sophia," Mrs. Clara patiently explained on a rainy Thursday, "the judge will consider many factors before deciding who you should stay with. It's not just a matter of who has more money." "But Dad's firm has important lawyers," Sophia protested, scribbling notes in her notebook covered with flowery paper. "Yes, but the law says that the child's well-being comes first. And you know what else? In some cases, the judge can directly hear the child." Sophia's eyes lit up. "I can talk to the judge?" "In theory, yes. The Children's Protection Act guarantees the child's right to be heard. It's here in Article 12. Mrs. Clara pointed to a paragraph highlighted in yellow. But this usually happens when the child is a bit older. How old? It depends on the judge and the circumstances. Some consider it from 12 years old. Others may hear younger children if they show maturity. Sophia frowned, thoughtful. She was only 8 years old, but she needed to convince the judge that she was mature enough to be heard. She began to make a list of arguments, evidence, and important points. Meanwhile, at home, Sophia watched her mother struggle to keep up appearances. Deborah continued to try to hide her worry, but the stress was visible in her trembling hands and the way she spent sleepless nights typing on the old computer, trying to understand complex legal terms. One night, returning from the bathroom, Sophia found Deborah crying silently over documents spread on the kitchen table. "Mom?" Sophia called in a soft voice. Deborah quickly wiped away her tears, trying to compose herself. "Hi, sweetheart. Why aren't you sleeping?" "I went to the bathroom," she replied, approaching and hugging her mother. "Are you crying because of the hearing?" Deborah's face paled. "How do you know about that?" Sophia hesitated but decided to be honest. "I saw the papers, Mom. I know Dad wants to take me." For a moment, Deborah seemed about to collapse, but then she took a deep breath and pulled Sophia onto her lap, even though the girl was already too big for it. "Sophia, I'm so sorry you found out this way. I wanted to protect you from all of this. Why does he want to take me away from you?" Deborah chose her words carefully. "Your father thinks he can offer you a better life with more opportunities. And maybe he can, financially speaking. But I don't want to go," Sophia said firmly. "I don't want to live with him and Victoria. I'm fighting to prevent that from happening, my love. But I need to be honest with you." Deborah held her daughter's little hands. "It will be difficult. Your father has very good lawyers, and I don't have any," Sophia finished. "I know. I saw the letter from legal aid." Deborah nodded, surprised once again by her daughter's perceptiveness. "I'm studying the laws myself, but it's complicated. I'm trying to find someone who can help us pro bono. That means for free." "What if no one helps?" "Then I'll do the best I can alone," Deborah said, forcing a brave smile. "What matters is that you know that no matter what happens, I will always love you and I will always fight for you." Sophia hugged her mother tightly, feeling her pain. At that moment, she promised herself that she would not let her mother fight alone. The next day, Sophia approached Mrs. Clara with new urgency. "I need to know how to prepare to speak in court," she declared. Determined. Mrs. Clara considered the situation for a moment. Her instinct told her she should inform the school counselor about the situation, but something in Sophia's determination made her hesitate. "Sophia, perhaps you should let the adults handle this," she suggested gently. "The adults are doing it wrong," Sophia replied, with wisdom beyond her years. "My father has powerful lawyers and my mother has no one." "That's not fair." Mrs. Clara couldn't disagree. "What do you plan to do?" "I want to talk to the judge. I want to show that it's not about who has more money, but about where I'm happiest." The librarian adjusted her glasses, thoughtful. "Well, if you're determined, let's do this right. First, we need to understand how a custody hearing works." Over the following days, Sophia and Mrs. Clara delved into research. They found educational videos about how courts work, studied similar cases, and even practiced small public speaking exercises in the back of the library. Sophia learned about the Children's Protection Act, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, and legal precedents where minors were heard in court. Mrs. Clara was impressed with the speed at which the girl absorbed complex information. "You'd make a great lawyer someday, you know," the librarian commented as she helped Sophia organize her notes. "First, I need to be my mum's lawyer," the girl replied, without looking up from the notebook, where she was jotting down important points for her argument. With 1 week left until the hearing, Sophia knew she needed more than words. She needed concrete evidence. She began to meticulously record each of her father's visits in recent months, noting the duration, always short, the activities, usually impersonal, and the interactions with Victoria, constantly tense. She also asked teacher Louise for a history of her grades and school attendance, explaining only that she needed it for an important document. Her exemplary grades and perfect attendance would serve as proof that she was well cared for, despite financial difficulties. On the eve of the hearing, Sophia surprised Deborah with a carefully organized notebook. "What is this, honey?" Deborah asked, leafing through the colorful pages. "It's our defense," Sophia replied simply. "I studied a lot, Mum. I know what we need to say tomorrow." Deborah slowly sat down at the kitchen table, Sophia's notebook open in front of her. Her hands trembled as she turned the pages meticulously organized by her 8-year-old daughter. There were summaries of laws, quotes from the Children's Protection Act, clippings about children's rights, and even a detailed timeline of Richard's visits over the past 6 months, all the dates, times and observations about his behavior. Deborah couldn't find words. How did you do all this?" "Mrs. Clara helped me," Sophia replied, sitting next to her mother. "She taught me how to research and organize information." "Look, Mom, this part is important." She pointed to a highlighted passage in yellow. "It says here that economic condition alone is not determinative for granting custody. That means just because Dad has more money, it doesn't mean the judge will give me to him." Deborah felt a lump in her throat. There was something profoundly wrong and at the same time extraordinary about that scene. Her little daughter, explaining custody laws with the seriousness of an adult. A child who should have been playing with dolls was now trying to save her own family. Deborah hesitated, holding her daughter's hands. "You shouldn't be worried about these things. This is an adult's responsibility, my responsibility." "But you're alone, Mum," Sophia replied with disarming simplicity. "And Dad has a lot of lawyers. It's not fair." Deborah felt tears burn her eyes. She had fought so hard to protect Sophia, to ensure she had a normal childhood despite the separation, the night shifts, the financial difficulties. And now her little one was taking on a burden that even adults shouldn't carry. "Do you understand what's going to happen tomorrow?" Deborah asked, holding her daughter's face in her hands. "It's going to be an intimidating place with serious people saying complicated things. I don't want you to go through that." "But I need to go," Sophia insisted. "The judge needs to hear me. It's here in Article 12 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child." She quickly flipped through the notebook until she found the right page. "The child has the right to express his or her views freely on all matters affecting him or her, and to have those views given due weight," she read aloud, with the fluency of someone who had memorized every word. Deborah was speechless. Part of her wanted to protect Sophia from that adult world of courts and legal disputes. Another part recognized that, without a lawyer, her chances of maintaining custody were minimal against the powerful firm hired by Richard and Victoria. "Do you really want to do this?" she finally asked, wiping away a stubborn tear. Sophia nodded with determination. "I want to stay with you, Mum, and I'm going to tell the judge that." That night, mother and daughter prepared together for the battle that awaited them. While Deborah separated the original documents, pay stubs, proofs of residence, Sophia's school reports, the girl organized her notes, mentally rehearsing what she would say to the judge if she had the chance. "What do you think your dad will say tomorrow?" Deborah asked cautiously as she arranged the folder with the documents. Sophia thought for a moment. "He'll say his house is bigger, that the private school where he wants to put me is better, and that you work too many hours." There was an adult understanding in her analysis. "But he won't say that he hardly ever visits me, that Victoria doesn't like it when I talk loudly, and that I'm happy here, even if it's small." Deborah felt a pang in her heart. "Your father loves you, Sophia. We just have different views on what's best for you." Sophia tilted her head, thoughtful. "If he really loved me, he wouldn't try to separate me from you." There was a cruel wisdom in that childish observation that Deborah couldn't contest. While Deborah took a shower, Sophia sat on the bed she shared with her mother in the small one-bedroom apartment and picked up her diary, a purple-covered notebook with a small padlock. In her round, careful handwriting, she wrote, "Dear Diary, tomorrow is the most important day of my life. I'm going to court to fight to stay with my mom. I'm scared, but I can't show it. Mom needs to see me strong. Mrs. Clara said I need to speak respectfully and clearly. I need to show the judge that I'm mature enough to decide where I want to live. I know Dad has more money, but money doesn't buy love. And Mom gives me all the love in the world, even when she's tired from her shifts. Please, God, help the judge understand this." Sophia closed the diary and put it under her pillow. She looked at the photo on the bedside table, her younger in Richard's lap, with Deborah beside them, all smiling in front of a Christmas tree. Hers seemed like another life. The next day, Sophia woke up before her alarm clock. The sun had barely begun to rise when she was already up. Carefully choosing her clothes, the navy blue dress she had received for Christmas, her prettiest sandals, and a white ribbon to tie back her curly hair, Deborah found her daughter already dressed, sitting on the edge of the bed rereading her notes. "Are you already ready?" she asked, surprised. Sophia nodded. "I want to look responsible and organized. Mrs. Clara said first impressions are important." Deborah sat next to her daughter, still in her faded pajamas. "Sophia, I want you to know something. No matter what happens today, you are the bravest person I have ever known. And I'm so proud to be your mother." Sophia hugged Deborah tightly. "Everything will be all right, Mom. We'll stay together." While Deborah got ready, putting on her only formal outfit, a black pencil skirt and a simple white blouse, saved for special occasions, Sophia prepared breakfast for both of them. Buttered toast and the coffee she had learned to make by watching her mother. "You need to eat." "Mom," Sophia insisted, pushing the plate towards Deborah, who seemed unable to swallow anything. The journey to the Manhattan Civil Court was silent. On the crowded subway, Deborah held Sophia's hand tightly, as if fearing she might lose her right there even before the court decision. The girl, in turn, carried her pink school backpack, where she had stored her special notebook and some books to show the judge. Upon arriving at the imposing courthouse building, Deborah felt her legs weaken. The place was intimidating, with its grand columns and people in suits rushing about. Sophia, however, looked at everything with curiosity and determination. In the waiting room of Family Court Part 2, Deborah and Sophia sat on a worn wooden bench. Across the hall they saw Richard arrive, accompanied by Victoria and two impeccably dressed men, his lawyers. Richard was a tall, handsome man, with the same light brown skin tone and the same dark curls as Sophia, though his were always meticulously tamed with gel. Victoria, his current wife, was an elegant woman with straight blonde hair, always impeccably dressed. Richard's eyes met Sophia's and softened for a moment. He made a move to approach, but was restrained by a subtle touch from Victoria on his arm. "Dad didn't come to talk to me," Sophia commented, observing the scene. "He was probably advised not to have contact before the hearing," Deborah explained, trying to soften the situation. "Or Victoria didn't let him," Sophia retorted with a surprising perceptiveness. Before Deborah could respond, the door to the courtroom opened, and a court officer called their names. "Case number 2024.0125678912. Richard Miller versus Deborah Smith. Custody dispute of minor Sophia Smith Miller." Deborah took a deep breath and took Sophia's hand. "Are you ready?" Sophia nodded, clutching her notebook to her chest with her free hand. "I am, Mom." They entered the courtroom, a solemn environment with dark wood-paneled walls. In the center, a large U-shaped table where the judge would sit at the head. On one side, Richard and his lawyers were already positioned. On the other, only two chairs awaited Deborah and Sophia. The contrast was evident. On one side, expensive leather briefcases, state-of-the-art laptops, and Italian suits. On the other, a worn plastic folder and a child's notebook decorated with star stickers. The officer announced the judge's entry, and everyone stood. Judge Matthew Barnes, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a severe expression, took his central seat. "We may begin," he declared, after adjusting his reading glasses. He looked at both sides and frowned. "Mrs. Smith, I see you are without legal representation. Do you understand that this may prejudice your position?" Deborah swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Honor. Unfortunately, I cannot afford a lawyer, and the Legal Aid Society could only assist me after this date." The judge made a note. "Very well. We will proceed then. First, I would like to understand the presence of the minor in the room. Normally, children of this age wait outside during proceedings." Before Deborah could answer, Sophia stood up, her notebook firmly held in her small hands. "Your Honor," she said in a clear voice, surprising everyone, "I would like to be heard, as is my right guaranteed by Article 12 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, ratified by the United States." An astonished silence filled the room. The judge blinked several times, visibly surprised by the 8-year-old girl's intervention, citing international legislation. Judge Matthew Barnes adjusted his glasses and leaned slightly forward, observing with curiosity the small figure who had just spoken with such propriety. "Are you Sophia?" he asked in a softer tone than he had used before. "Yes, Your Honor," the girl replied, maintaining the upright posture she had practiced with Mrs. Clara. "Sophia Smith Miller, 8 years old." Across the room, Richard frowned, exchanging worried glances with his lawyers. Victoria whispered something in the ear of one of them, who nodded and immediately stood up. "Your Honor, with all due respect, the minor is neither old enough nor has the discernment to participate in this type of proceeding. We request that she wait outside the room as is customary." Judge Barnes raised a hand, silencing the lawyer. "Mr. Carter, I am aware of the usual procedures. However," he turned to Sophia, "I am intrigued by the knowledge demonstrated by this young lady. We will proceed a little differently today." He turned his gaze back to Sophia. "Do you understand what is happening here today, Sophia?" "Yes, Your Honor," she replied firmly. "My father wants sole custody of me, which means I would live with him and Victoria, and only see my mother during supervised visits." The clarity of the answer seemed to impress the judge. He cast a glance at the children's advocate present, who observed the scene with equal interest. "And do you know why we are having this hearing?" "Because adults sometimes can't agree on what's best for their children," Sophia replied. "And when that happens, a judge needs to decide, always keeping the child's best interest in mind. It's in Article 227 of the Constitution." A murmur ran through the room. Richard ran his hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. One of his lawyers scribbled furiously on a notepad. "Impressive," the judge commented, allowing himself a slight smile. "Very well, Sophia. I will allow you to remain in the room and I will hear you at the appropriate time. But first we need to follow some procedures." The next 2 hours were agonizing. Richard's lead lawyer, Mr. Thomas Carter, presented well-constructed arguments about the superiority of the conditions offered by his client. A spacious house in the Upper East Side, access to the best private education, financial stability, flexible hours that would allow for greater parental involvement, all contrasting with Deborah's small apartment and her irregular shifts as a nursing technician. "Your Honor," Mr. Carter argued, "Miss Smith, despite her obvious good intentions, simply cannot offer the ideal environment for the minor's development. She works night shifts, frequently leaving the child under the care of neighbors. She lives in a one-bedroom apartment where she shares a bed with her daughter. She cannot afford extracurricular activities or educational trips that would broaden the minor's horizons." Sophia watched everything with attentive eyes, squeezing Deborah's hand under the table whenever she felt her mother tremble. When it was Deborah's turn to speak, her voice faltered several times. Without the technical preparation of a lawyer, she focused on emotional and practical aspects. "I know I can't give Sophia luxuries," she admitted with a choked voice. "But I give her all my love, my time, my attention. Our apartment is small, yes, but it's a happy home. Sophia has never been alone. When I'm on shift, she stays with Mrs. Eleanor, whom she has known since she was a baby, and loves like a grandmother." The judge's technical questions, however, caught Deborah off guard. When asked about financial planning for future education, about alternative living arrangements, about specific legal issues, she stammered and got confused, clearly overwhelmed by the legal language and the pressure of the moment. Judge Barnes took some notes and then looked directly at Sophia. "I think it's time to hear what Sophia has to say. All adults will remain silent until she finishes." Sophia stood up, her small body almost disappearing behind the imposing table. She took a deep breath, as she had practiced with Mrs. Clara, and opened her notebook to the first marked page. "Your Honor, I have prepared some things to show you," she began, her childish voice echoing in the silent room. "First, I want to say that I understand that everyone here wants what they think is best for me, but only I know where I am truly happy." Sophia took her school report card from her backpack and handed it to the court officer, who passed it to the judge. "These are my grades at Greenwich Village Elementary School. I have the best grades in my class, I've never missed school, and Teacher Louise always praises my behavior." The judge examined the document carefully. "This shows that, even living in a small apartment, and with a mother who works a lot, I am developing well," Sophia continued. I don't need a big house to be happy or to learn. Next, Sophia took a colourful calendar from her backpack. This is the record of all my father's visits in the last 6 months, she explained, also handing over this document. As you can see, out of 24 scheduled visits, he only showed up for 9. The average duration was 3 hours, usually at shopping centres or restaurants, always with Victoria present. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His lawyers exchanged worried glances. When I go to their house, Sophia continued, I have to follow very strict rules. I can't run. I can't talk loudly. I can't leave my toys out of place. Victoria always says I need to learn to behave like a young lady. Found that my curly hair needs to be straightened to look more presentable. Sophia paused, turning the page of her notebook. Now, I want to talk about something important I discovered, she said, her voice trembling slightly for the first time. 2 weeks ago, when I visited my father, I overheard a conversation between him and Victoria. They didn't know I was coming back from the bathroom. Richard's lawyers stirred, but the judge raised his hand, ordering silence. My father said that as soon as he got my custody, he would have access to the inheritance money my grandfather left for me. Sophia looked directly at her father, whose face had paled. He said that money could save the firm and pay off debts. The entire room seemed to freeze. Richard opened his mouth to protest, but the judge's stern look stopped him. I also discovered, Sophia continued, taking another paper from her backpack, that my father stopped paying child support 3 months ago. Here is my mother's bank statement, showing that the deposit stopped in July. Victoria urgently whispered something in Richard's ear, who seemed increasingly agitated. My father told my mother he was having financial difficulties, Sophia explained, but during the same period, he bought a new car and took Victoria to Paris. I saw the photos on her Instagram. Judge Barnes looked seriously at Richard, who now avoided everyone's gaze in the room. And finally, Your Honour. Sophia turned the last page of her notebook. I want to read something I wrote last night. In a clear, albeit emotional voice, Sophia read, Home is not the size of the house, but the size of the love. My mum works hard, comes home tired, but never ever fails to give me a goodnight kiss and check my homework. When I get sick, she swaps shifts to stay with me. When I have nightmares, she hugs me, even when it's almost time for her to wake up for work. My dad has a big, beautiful house, but when I'm there, I feel like a visitor, not a daughter. No one asks me how my day was or what I'm feeling. No one plays with me on the living room floor or makes chocolate fudge with me in the kitchen, getting everything messy and laughing. I know adults think money is very important, and it is to buy food and medicine, but money doesn't buy love, nor does it make a house a home. Please, Your Honour, don't separate me from my mom. She is my home no matter where we live. A profound silence filled the room. Deborah cried silently. The children's advocate had teary eyes. Even one of Richard's lawyers seemed moved. Judge Barnes cleared his throat, visibly touched by the girl's words. Sophia, you impress me with your maturity and clarity. But I must ask, these allegations about the inheritance and the non-payment of child support, can you prove them? Sophia nodded seriously. Yes, Your Honour. I recorded my father's conversation with Victoria on my cell phone. I didn't know if it was allowed, but Mrs. Clara said that in some cases, the judge can consider all available evidence. She took a small cell phone from her backpack, an old model that had been Deborah's, and handed it to the court officer. The recording is there, along with screenshots of Victoria's travel posts on social media, with the dates and the credit card statements showing my father's expenses that I found in his office, while he was telling my mother he had no money for child support. The room was in complete silence. Judge Barnes looked at the children's advocate, who nodded, indicating that those pieces of evidence could be considered. Mr. Richard Miller, the judge turned to Sophia's father, would you like to comment on these extremely serious allegations? Richard, now visibly shaken, looked at his lawyers, who seemed as surprised as he was. Mr. Carter stood up, trying to regain control of the situation. Your Honour, these allegations are obviously fabricated. We are facing a clear manipulation of the minor by the mother, who— I wasn't manipulated, Sophia interrupted with tears in her eyes for the first time. My mom didn't even know what I was doing. She tried to protect me from all of this, but I saw her crying in secret every night, worried about losing me, while my father was in Paris with money that should have been mine. Judge Barnes struck the gavel once, calling for order. "Ms. Campbell," he addressed the children's advocate, "I request that you immediately examine this evidence." The children's advocate took the cell phone and documents, withdrawing to an adjacent room. The atmosphere in the courtroom was one of absolute tension. Richard and Victoria conversed in agitated whispers with their lawyers. Deborah held Sophia's hand, both waiting in silence. 15 minutes later, the children's advocate returned, her face serious. She approached the judge and spoke in a low but audible tone. "The evidence appears consistent. Your Honor." The recording clearly captures Mr. Richard Miller's voice, discussing how he would use the minor's inheritance money to pay off debts of the law firm, which is close to bankruptcy. The statements confirm luxurious expenses during the period when child support payments ceased. Judge Barnes nodded gravely and turned to Sophia and Deborah. "I will declare a 30-minute recess. When we return, I will announce my decision." The 30-minute recess seemed an eternity. Deborah and Sophia remained seated on a bench in the courthouse corridor, hands clasped, while Richard and his legal team gathered in a private room, their raised voices occasionally escaping through the door. "Are you okay?" Deborah asked softly, stroking her daughter's hair. Sophia nodded, but her eyes revealed emotional exhaustion. "I just want to go home, Mom." "We'll be home soon, my love," Deborah promised, though she wasn't sure if home would still be the small apartment they shared in Greenwich Village. When everyone returned to the courtroom, the atmosphere was completely different. Richard seemed to have aged years in just half an hour, his face marked by an unhealthy pallor. Victoria maintained an impassive expression, but her fingers drummed nervously on the table. The lawyers, once confident, now reorganized papers with anxious gestures. Judge Matthew Barnes entered the room with measured steps and took his seat. His face revealed no emotion as he adjusted his reading glasses and arranged some notes in front of him. After carefully considering all the arguments and evidence presented today, the judge began, his grave voice filling the silent room. "I am ready to deliver my decision." Sophia squeezed her mother's hand tightly. "This is, without a doubt, one of the most extraordinary hearings I have presided over in my 20 years on the bench," Judge Barnes continued. "Rarely have I witnessed such a discrepancy between the formal presentation of a case and its underlying reality." The judge looked directly at Richard. "Mr. Miller, the evidence presented reveals a pattern of conduct that this court cannot ignore. The deliberate non-payment of child support while maintaining a luxurious lifestyle, the attempt to obtain custody motivated by financial interests, and the documented behavior during visits demonstrate that your actions are not guided by the minor's best interest." Richard lowered his eyes, unable to meet the judge's gaze. On the other hand, the judge turned to Deborah. "Mrs. Smith, despite financial difficulties and the absence of legal representation, has demonstrated an unwavering commitment to her daughter's well-being. The evidence presented, including Sophia's exemplary school performance, indicates a stable and loving family environment, even with limited resources." The judge paused, then looked directly at Sophia. "And as for you, young Sophia, I must say that I am deeply impressed. Your maturity, eloquence, and courage are remarkable. You reminded us today that the judicial system exists to serve people, especially the most vulnerable, and not the other way around." Sophia felt a blush creep up her face, but she maintained her composure, as she had practiced with Mrs. Clara. "Therefore," Judge Barnes continued, "it is the decision of this court that sole custody of Sophia Smith Miller be granted exclusively to her mother, Deborah Smith." Deborah sobbed, covering her mouth with her hands. Sophia hugged her, silent tears streaming down her face. "Furthermore," the judge proceeded, "I order Richard Miller to make immediate payment of all overdue child support, with due legal interest. The amount of monthly child support will be recalculated considering the parent's actual financial capacity, as evidenced by the statements presented." Richard's lawyers scribbled furiously in their pads, probably already planning appeals. "I also determine," the judge's tone became more severe, "an investigation into the possible mismanagement of the inheritance intended for the minor. Until the conclusion of this investigation, any access to the funds will be blocked, and a special guardian will be appointed to supervise the management of these resources." Judge Barnes looked one last time at his notes before concluding. Finally, I want to record in the official court record the extraordinary role Sophia played today. Her participation not only changed the course of this specific case, but raises important questions about how our judicial system addresses the voice of children in proceedings that directly affect their lives. Striking the gavel, the judge formally closed the session. The hearing is adjourned. As people began to stand up and gather their belongings, Judge Barnes gestured for Sophia to approach. "Sophia," he said in a gentler tone, "in all my years as a judge, I have never seen anything like what you did today. I would like to know who helped you with all this research and preparation." "Mrs. Clara, my school librarian," Sophia replied honestly. "She taught me how to research and helped me understand the laws." The judge smiled. "Well, tell Mrs. Clara she has an extraordinary student, and that the New York State Supreme Court thanks her for her service to legal education." On the way home on the crowded subway, Deborah still seemed in a state of shock. "I can't believe what happened," she repeated, hugging Sophia as if fearing she might disappear. "You were incredible, my daughter. Incredible." Sophia, exhausted after all the day's tension, leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "I just told the truth, Mom, and I showed the evidence as Mrs. Clara taught me." Upon arriving home, they were surprised by Mrs. Eleanor, who was anxiously waiting at the door. "So, how did it go?" the neighbor asked, wringing her hands in her apron. "We won," Deborah replied, her voice choked. "Thanks to Sophia. I have no words to describe it." That night, after Sophia fell asleep, Deborah called the school principal, reporting what had happened and expressing her immense gratitude to the librarian who had helped her daughter. Unbeknownst to her, that call would be the first step in a series of events that would transform not only Sophia's life, but the family justice system across the country. The next morning, Principal Martha Green convened a special meeting with the entire teaching staff. Sophia's story was told in detail, eliciting reactions of astonishment and admiration. "What this girl did is extraordinary," commented Principal Martha emotionally. "She used knowledge and truth to fight for justice. This is exactly what we try to teach our students every day." Mrs. Clara, the librarian, wiped away a discreet tear. "Sophia has something special. A rare combination of intelligence, empathy, and determination. I just showed her the ropes. She did all the rest herself." Teacher Louise, who accompanied Sophia daily in the classroom, nodded. "I always knew she was special, but this is beyond any expectation." The story didn't stop at the school. In the following days, it began to circulate among courthouse staff, reaching the ears of journalists covering the legal area. The first article appeared in the Metro section of the New York Times. "The Little Lawyer. 8-year-old girl surprises court and wins custody battle." Soon, other publications became interested in the story. Sophia's image, always with her face partially covered to protect her identity, began to appear in reports on children's rights and access to justice. 1 week after the hearing, Sophia was surprised by a special visit at school. Dr. Rebecca Campbell, president of the Children and Youth Committee of the New York State Bar Association, NYSBA, had requested a conversation with the little lawyer who was shaking up the legal community. Sophia, the lawyer said, sitting in the school library, the place that had become the girls' refuge and learning center. "What you did was extraordinary and very courageous, but it also raised important questions about how our judicial system treats children involved in family disputes." Sophia listened attentively, sitting next to Mrs. Clara, who had been invited to participate in the meeting. "Many children go through situations similar to yours every day," Dr. Rebecca continued, "but they don't have your courage, your articulation, or someone like Mrs. Clara to guide them. They are silenced in the process, as if they had nothing important to say about their own lives." "That's not fair," Sophia replied simply. "Exactly," the lawyer agreed with a smile. "And that's why we are starting a movement to change that. We want all children involved in family proceedings to have the right to be adequately heard and to have specialized legal representation that truly defends their interests." Sophia frowned, thoughtful. "Like a lawyer just for the child?" "Precisely," Dr. Rebecca confirmed, impressed. "A lawyer who represents neither the father nor the mother, but who exclusively defends what is best for the child." Before saying goodbye, the lawyer extended an invitation that would change the course of Sophia's life. "We are organizing an event at the NYSBA to discuss changes in legislation regarding children's rights in judicial proceedings. We would love for you to participate and share your experience, with your mother's permission, of course." 2 weeks later, dressed in her best outfit, a navy blue skirt and a white blouse carefully ironed by Deborah, Sophia entered the imposing auditorium of the New York State Bar Association. The place was packed with lawyers, judges, prosecutors, and family law specialists. When it was her turn to speak, Sophia timidly approached the microphone, adjusted to her height by a solicitous assistant. She looked at the audience, located her mother's smiling face in the front row, and took a deep breath. "My name is Sophia Smith Miller," she began, her childish voice echoing through the sound system. "And a month ago I had to be my own lawyer, because no one else could speak for me." The silence in the auditorium was absolute as the girl shared her story, the hidden documents she discovered, the research in the school library, the preparation for the hearing, and finally, the moment she stood up to defend her right to remain with her mother. "I was lucky," Sophia concluded, looking directly at the audience of legal professionals. "I had a librarian who helped me, a judge who wanted to hear me, and evidence I could show. But what about the other children? Who speaks for them when the adults are too busy fighting to realize what really matters?" The ovation that followed was deafening. Sophia, surprised by the reaction, looked at her mother, who was openly crying, applauding with pride. 5 years passed since that first hearing that transformed Sophia Smith Miller's life. What began as a personal battle to remain with her mother had become a national movement for the reform of the family justice system. At 13, Sophia was no longer the scared little girl who had to defend herself in court. Now she was an articulate and confident teenager whose name had become synonymous with children's rights in the United States. On that June morning, as she prepared for what would be the most important moment of her young life, Sophia reviewed her notes in the small office she shared with her mother at the Children and Youth Defense Center, an NGO that had emerged inspired by her story. "Nervous?" Deborah asked, entering the room with 2 mugs of hot chocolate, a tradition they had maintained since their days in the small Greenwich Village apartment. Sophia smiled, adjusting her navy blue blazer over her white blouse, a more sophisticated version of the outfit she had worn on her first day in court. "A little. It's not every day you speak in Congress." Deborah placed the mug on the table and hugged her daughter's shoulders. Who would have thought that the girl who secretly researched in the school library would today be going to Washington, D.C. to advocate for a law named after her? Bill 1247-2029, popularly known as Sophia's Law, was finally being voted on after years of debate and adjustments. The proposal aimed to ensure that every child involved in family judicial proceedings had the right to a specialized lawyer to exclusively represent their interests, regardless of the parent's financial condition. The journey to that moment had not been easy. After that first lecture at the NYSBA, Sophia and her story gained national notoriety. She was invited to television shows, radio interviews, and lectures at law schools across the country. In each appearance, her message was clear and forceful. Children are not objects to be disputed, but people with a right to a voice. Initially, there was resistance. Critics argued that giving more voice to children in judicial proceedings could expose them to manipulation or undue pressure. Others claimed that the system was already overburdened and that the measure would be financially unfeasible. But Sophia and the growing group of supporters who formed around her did not give up. Mrs. Clara, the librarian who had started it all, became a fierce ally, traveling alongside Sophia to lectures in public schools throughout New York State. Teacher Louise organized an educational project to teach children about their basic rights. Judge Matthew Barnes, impressed by the impact of the case, became a defender of judicial reform to better accommodate the needs of children. At 11, Sophia, with the help of volunteer lawyers, created the first support group for children involved in judicial disputes. The My Voice, My Right project began modestly in the Greenwich Village Elementary School library, but soon expanded to other schools and communities. There, children learned about their basic rights, how to express themselves in difficult situations, and received emotional support from others going through similar situations. Sophia conducted the sessions with extraordinary empathy, transforming her traumatic experience into strength to help others. Meanwhile, Deborah had reinvented herself. With a full scholarship earned on merit, she graduated in social work and now coordinated support programs for vulnerable families at the same center where Sophia did her volunteer work. Life had improved for mother and daughter. With the correct payment of child support and adequate supervision of Sophia's inheritance, now protected by a judicial trustee, until she came of age, they had moved to a larger apartment where each had her own room. Deborah continued working at Mount Sinai Hospital, but now in the social services department, with more regular hours. As for Richard, the outcome had been complex. Investigations confirmed his attempts to improperly access Sophia's inheritance, resulting in legal proceedings that were still ongoing. The relationship with Victoria did not survive the scandal, and he faced a severe financial crisis when the law firm finally went bankrupt. In the last 2 years, however, something unexpected happened. Richard, confronted with the consequences of his actions, began a genuine process of reflection and repentance. He began to regularly fulfill his visits with Sophia, this time truly present and interested in his daughter's life. "Do you think he'll be there today?" Sophia asked, finishing her chocolate. Deborah hesitated. The relationship with her ex-husband was still delicate, but she had learned to prioritize Sophia's well-being above past resentments. He promised he would be, and lately he's been keeping his promises. Sophia nodded. The relationship with her father was still being rebuilt, but for the first time in years, there was room for optimism. The flight to Washington, D.C. was smooth. In the federal capital, they were received by representatives of the Congressional Caucus for Children's Rights, who had sponsored the bill. Sophia's nervousness increased as they approached the imposing building of the United States Congress. "Take a deep breath," Deborah advised, holding her daughter's hand as they walked through the corridors of American legislative power. "Remember everything you've overcome to get here." The chamber was packed when Sophia entered. Representatives, senators, journalists, and representatives of civil society organizations occupied every available space. In the area reserved for special guests, Sophia spotted familiar faces. Mrs. Clara, now retired but as active as ever in educational projects, Teacher Louise, Judge Barnes, and to her surprise, Richard, sitting discreetly in the last row. When it was her turn to speak, Sophia approached the microphone with the same determination. She had shown that first day in court 5 years earlier, but now she was no longer a scared child fighting for her own survival. She was a young woman defending the rights of all American children. "Ladies and gentlemen of Congress," she began, her adolescent voice clear and firm. "5 years ago, I was just an 8-year-old girl who, out of necessity, had to be her own lawyer in a family court. Today I stand before the representatives of the American people to ask that no other child ever has to do the same." The silence in the chamber was absolute as the girl narrated not only her own story, but also those of dozens of other children she had helped over the years. Mark, 6 years old, who was used as a weapon in a dispute between his parents, being repeatedly interrogated by both about what happened in the other's house. Julia, 10 years old, whose health problems were neglected because her parents couldn't agree on which doctor should treat her. Raphael, 7 years old, who began to self-harm because he had no one to talk to about the suffering caused by his parents' tumultuous separation. Sophia paused, looking directly at the lawmakers. These children had no voice. They had no one to speak for them, no one to truly listen to them and defend their interests above all others. From her briefcase, Sophia took out a yellowed sheet of paper. "When I was 8, on the eve of that first hearing that changed my life, I wrote this letter. I never showed it to anyone, not even my mother." In a choked voice, Sophia read, "Dear God, tomorrow I'm going to court. I'm very scared, but I can't show it because my mom is already scared. Please don't let them separate me from her. Please make the judge understand that I don't want to live with my dad and Victoria, who don't let me be a kid. Please make someone listen to me. I know I'm small, but I know how I feel. I know where I am truly loved. Please, God, help me be strong tomorrow, Sophia." Silent tears streamed down the faces of many present. Deborah covered her face with her hands. In the background, Richard lowered his head, visibly moved. "I was lucky," Sophia continued, composing herself. "The judge heard me, but how many letters like this are written every day by children who will never have the chance to be heard? How many desperate prayers are made by little ones who feel powerless before decisions that will transform their lives forever?" Sophia looked at the gallery where her mother was sitting. "Bill 1247 is not about me. It's about ensuring that every American child has the right to be truly represented in processes that directly affect their future. It's about recognizing that children are not property, but people with rights, feelings, and valid opinions." The young woman concluded her speech with firm words. "You have today the opportunity to transform pain into protection, suffering into security. You have the chance to tell every American child that their voice matters, that their feelings are valid, that their rights will be respected. Please do not waste this opportunity." The ovation that followed was deafening. Representatives from all political spectrums rose in a rare display of unanimity. When the vote finally occurred, hours later, the result was historic. Unanimous approval in both houses of Congress. Sophia's Law, as it was officially named, would revolutionize the American family justice system. From that day on, every child involved in judicial proceedings would have the right to a specialized lawyer designated to exclusively represent their interests. More than that, the law established protocols for children to be heard in an appropriate environment, without pressure or intimidation, and for their opinions to be effectively considered in judicial decisions. Leaving Congress, surrounded by journalists and supporters, Sophia was surprised by a figure who approached timidly. "Dad," she said, recognizing Richard among the crowd. "I am very proud of you, daughter," he said with sincerity in eyes that were once always calculating. "What you built from my mistake, is extraordinary." Sophia hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward and hugged her father. It wasn't a complete forgiveness. Some wounds take time to heal completely, but it was a beginning. That night, in her hotel room in Washington, D.C., Sophia opened her laptop to record the day's events on her blog, which had become a national reference for children's rights. Before she started typing, she looked out the window at the starry Capitol sky. Somehow that scared 8-year-old girl who wrote desperate pleas to God had transformed into a young woman capable of changing the country, and her journey was just beginning. The following year, at 14, Sophia would found the Children's Voice Institute, an organization dedicated to training lawyers specialized in child representation. At 16, she would be invited to speak at the United Nations about the American model that was beginning to inspire similar reforms in other countries. And at 18, upon entering Columbia University's School of Law, fulfilling the dream that had been born in those days of research in the school library, Sophia would already have her name associated with the protection of over 5,000 children across the United States. The little lawyer who once stood alone in a courtroom had grown to give a voice to an entire generation. Dear listeners, we hope Sophia's journey has touched your hearts and shown how a child's determination can transform an entire system. Stories like this remind us of the power of truth and courage, even in the smallest voices. For more exciting narratives that explore family bonds and overcoming adversity, access our special playlist by clicking the icon to your left. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like and share your thoughts in the comments. Every day we bring new stories that celebrate the strength of the human spirit. Shall we continue this journey together? The story recounts the journey of Sophia Miller, an 8-year-old girl from New York City who, upon discovering her father wants to take sole custody from her mother, Deborah, decides to become her lawyer. With the help of librarian Mrs. Clara, Sophia researches laws and prepares arguments to defend her right to stay with her mother. I remained faithful to the original premise, adapting it to an American context with typical characters and locations. The Manhattan Civil Court, Greenwich Village Elementary School, Greenwich Village Neighborhood, the New York State Bar Association, and other references that enrich the setting. The narrative presents emotional twists and turns, and a gradual growth of the protagonist, culminating in the approval of Sophia's Law, which transforms the American judicial system regarding children's rights. I hope the story meets your expectations.